I mean, I've been
Yeah.
studying the Bible for over 40 years, and I'm just not sure that the Christian story, as it's been understood in the United States, can help us in a moment right now where it actually has been married with the dominant story of imperialism and
Mhm.
dominance. But how do we answer the challenge of othering in our
Yeah.
world with a story about othering? I just don't know how we get there.
Mhm. Welcome to the Mending Divides podcast, your source for unfiltered conversations about conflict and how to deal with it. I'm your host, Jared Swigert, and today's conversation is with my dear friend, Ben McBride. He's the founder of the Empower Initiative, an expert in helping organizations forge a culture of radical belonging, and the author of a book that talks about it all called Troubling the Water, which I want you to get because it belongs in all of our libraries. In this conversation, we talk about discomfort as guide and different approaches to dealing with conflict according to a person's proximity to power. Ben emphasizes the need to humanize those with authority, and he encourages us all in this time to be hard on systems, but soft on people. Our conversation gets especially provocative when Ben critiques the dominant Christian American story as too small to handle the world's suffering and as incongruent with Jesus in that it promotes othering and endorses the exclusion of enemies, both of which we don't need right now. So with that, here's my raw and fiery and unfiltered conversation with Ben McBride. And so I want to jump in, Ben, with you straight away, connected to your book, Troubling the Water. And one of the things that I was struck by right away as you wrote is the relationship you have with discomfort. And you invite us to actually step into the discomfort in order to pursue justice, in order to pursue belonging. And I'm finding that we live in this moment in time where too many of us experience discomfort or understand discomfort as something wrong is happening rather than something maybe right is happening, that we actually need to lean into the discomfort if we're going to see a world of mutual flourishing. And so I'm curious, Ben, from your point of view, what has your relationship with discomfort been in the work of mending divides or bridging differences? And can you think of a time where you really had to confront discomfort for the sake of justice, for the sake of belonging? And what was that like for you?
Yeah, well, I think the relationship with discomfort is a counterintuitive one. I think it's important to hold that up. I think the notion that we try to get away from discomfort isn't something that we should judge within ourselves. I'm learning more and
Mm,
more not to judge it within
mm,
myself because it's just a function of our amygdala. So, you know, we're wired as mammals to try to stay away from discomfort, which is why the work of mending divides and bridging differences is really a spiritual practice because it's actually moving against the way that
yeah.
we are physiologically wired, right? So I think it's important for us to note that so that somehow if we're feeling some resistance around the notion of leaning into discomfort, we don't judge ourselves too harshly and think that
Mhm.
somehow maybe there's something wrong with my character or I don't really care about the world or something like that. I think it's more to just recognize this is how I'm wired. My
Mm,
aspiration of wanting to resist how I'm wired is actually something that I should appreciate because it actually speaks to the spiritual nature of me seeking to live beyond just my raw instinct. And I think we can
mm,
use that as a starting point to think about, how we move forward and how we create a better world.
mhm.
When I think about it within my own life, I mean, there's so many places that I could go with it, but I mean, thinking about the notion of mending divides with interpersonal relationships, I actually think about my relationship with a guy that, Bill, who
Mm,
came in my life at a time where I was highly distrustful of particularly white evangelical men who
mm,
were in a leadership position because I had some scars that I was just recovering from over the last 5 to 6 years, along with some of the stories that I had from my
mm.
childhood that
Yeah.
made it difficult for me to silence that tension that I was feeling inside myself. And yet there's so much that came out of our relationship over the last 15 years that we've been on this deep brotherhood journey together, stepping into things that we care about in the world. But when I think about the beginning of that, it was really difficult for me because everything inside me was saying, this is just going to be like everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
just going to show up like everyone else who's hurt you or harmed you. He's going to misunderstand you. He's going to make mistakes. And he did a couple of those things
Yeah.
that I just
Totally.
named along
Yep.
the journey.
Yeah.
But what I've learned in that relationship was by disrupting my mistrust of that fueled by my own pain and trauma, there was actually a gift there as
Mm,
well. Something
mm,
that I needed, not just for like professional life and other things, something I actually needed for me.
mm,
And, it, for me to say as this big black dude that like, I love this guy in the same way or the most similar way that I love my biological brothers and sisters is a deeply profound journey to go from
mm.
deep distrust to a deep feeling of
Action.
siblingness
Yeah.
and
Wow.
affection and love. Like
Mhm.
I would say that I'm in love with this dude, obviously not in a romantic way, but in a deep
Yeah.
way that I would give my life for this dude and believe he would do the same. That's a
Mm.
journey, but I only got there through being willing to confront one of the things that really bothered me and I had fear
Wow.
about.
Yeah, yeah. A couple things that I hear, Ben, I want to explore with you. One is this sense of self-compassion, like a generosity that you have with yourself in that work. I'd love for you to reflect on how has self-compassion, especially like the way that you even demonstrated a monologue around, here's some of the questions, the
Mm.
concerns, the cautions that were going on inside of me. How are you gentle with yourself in those? Second question is, where did you go with those questions? Like, eventually, did you voice those questions to Bill and invite Bill into that? Or, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
how did those questions lose their power, lose their volume so that you could actually press in and work toward a new reality in this relationship?
Well, because I come from a starting point of a lot of codependency and some of my own baggage, right? There was a lot of conversations that I at first had to have about that relationship with myself. Like I had to ask myself, is this relationship valuable enough, the potential of it for me to even explore that with him in person? Or is this something that I'm just
Mm,
going to be a throwaway and actually say, no, I'm going to let this relationship just stay in a transactional place and not really think about it being in a transformative place? That was one of the things I had to think about. The notion of like self-compassion, I can see it now that it was there. I don't know that it was really present with me at the time.
mm,
That's what I was having in a practical way. I think I was trying to find a way how to wade through the waters of that relationship and what I was feeling. I think what kept me moving was a couple things. Like one, there was some professional opportunities in that relationship. We wanted to do some good work together. So there was a carrot hanging
yeah.
from that stick. But then the other thing was I was really feeling deeply connected to this guy. And I was recognizing that I wanted that connection, even
Mm,
though I was afraid of that connection going bad.
yeah.
So I don't know if it was self compassion. There's a part of me that wonders if it was just really wanting to believe that my fears weren't the most authentic truth of my life,
Ooh.
that there was actually something else. I think that's continued to be a part of my journey too. And I think a lot of us, it's like we don't want to believe that the things that keep us up at night in a bad way, that scare us, that make it hard to breathe, we don't want to believe that those are the most powerful things in the universe.
Mhm,
Like our souls, our hearts want to find a way to
mhm.
that better way. And I think over time, what, he and I's relationship has taught me, it's built some belief now that actually helps me
Yeah.
do that with others because I have some
Yep.
evidence now in
Evidence.
in my life. And that's what we all need. I think the evidence helps us
Yeah.
build more belief and like where that's difficult, sometimes for me, like this is where the self-compassion, the reorienting for me, particularly as somebody who grew up and was very vested in the Christian way, is the whole value for me was actually about faith being the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Like I wasn't supposed to look for evidence. I was supposed to
Yeah.
move forward. But I realized, no, I need some evidence. And
Mhm,
it's okay to need evidence. It's
mhm.
okay to move slow enough to get some evidence. But in order to get some, we also got to take some risks.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'm hearkening back to a story I think I told a few episodes back as it relates to a journey I took with my dad. And I'm not sure that going into some of the hard work that we did in the twilight of his life, I'm not sure that I had evidence to actually
Mm,
believe that you could be in an intimate co-creating relationship with somebody, in this case, with somebody with whom you disagreed on some pretty major things,
mhm,
And so I'm resonating with this idea that once we actually name the cautions identify some of the fears, find the courage to press into those and
Mhm.
actually take some risks to move toward that person. Like the story as it unfolds, the evidence, it built a belief in me that this kind of bridging is actually possible. And that I'm better off. Like my dad didn't come around to think like I thought. I didn't necessarily come around to think, but like I was better because of the journey that I took with him, such that, and this is the second thing I wanted to ask you about, like the chemicals that flooded my body
Mhm.
as it related to my dad were no longer animosity, it was affection,
Mhm.
right? And I wonder if that's some of the physiological evidence. This is what starts to happen in us as we dare to bridge across difference or we bridge divides or whatever it is. Like suddenly, when the chemicals that flood my body are the chemicals of affection toward that other, that irritant, maybe even that constructed enemy, now something is actually changing. I'm transforming.
Mhm.
And so say a little bit more about the spiritual side, like the spiritual physiological fusion, like to
Mhm.
go against the natural biology to resist and stay away for the sake of survival. But what is the juice that actually moves us forward anyway? And how do we tap into that better?
Well, this is where I think I've really been inspired by Harari's work, the author of Sapiens and Homo Deus, and a couple other books, because what I like that he talks about is this notion that as Homo sapiens, right, as people, the way we've always understood ourselves and organized ourselves was both through organizing ourselves into clans and groups, like so the connection with
Yeah.
the other, and story, the story we told about ourselves, and often the gossip and the stories that we told about
Yep.
whoever we constructed as the other, right? And so I think, there's that muscle memory that we all have. The spirituality to me that he talks
Mm.
about and Dr. Powell, others talk about is new stories. What's the legends and lore that have oftentimes given people the ability to transcend that base story that just comes from their clan? And
Mm.
I feel like we're in a moment right now. Like I feel like I am personally, to just keep it all the way a buck. Like I'm in a moment right now where I'm really wondering and thirsty for a new story that actually has the potential to help me, the people that I love, the people that I'm not sure love me and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I'm challenged to love. I feel like we need a new story that can help us figure out how we can be connected and aspire for a different kind of spiritual connection to each other, because it does feel to me that the stories that we've had over time, and I say it respectfully to all of us that
Mhm.
are still rooted in some of these stories, there's a part of me as somebody who's birthed from those stories, particularly the Christian story, that's wondering whether the story has anything left to offer us for the moment that we're actually
Man,
in.
say more, man. Give us more on that because I'm with you in that it feels that the dominant story is that we get the world we want through force rather than friendship.
I think so. And, this is just two friends talking, right? And
Yep.
all the rest of y'all listening, right? So if we're going to root this conversation in like our Christian religion, right? It's based a lot, regardless as to what expression you have, on othering and supremacy at the heart of the story. It's about being chosen as God's people. It's about there being, for most expressions of the tradition, one way for someone to relate, transcend, connect with the divine. It's about a very particular prescriptive process by which you can do that, that has a lot of different iterations, confession, baptism, etc.
Mm.
But it operates from this notion that there is one way, it is the only way. And those who don't are othered in sometimes more overt or sometimes
Yeah.
covert ways. I don't know that story can actually help us in a moment right now where even here within the United States, we are dealing with a mass ideology of othering.
Yeah.
So, how do you actually respond to the othering with a story of othering?
Oh, come on, man.
Unless you're going to
Yeah.
significantly change that story.
Right.
And I just don't know, because of all the money that's invested in the story, all the history that's invested in the story, that folks are really willing to try to change that story.
Mhm.
But I'm just not sure that I can be compelled as somebody that born and raised on the pulpit floor, went to
Yeah.
Christian school. I mean, I've been
Yeah.
studying the Bible for over 40 years, and I'm just not sure that the Christian story, as it's been understood in the United States, can help us in a moment right now where it actually has been married with the dominant story of imperialism and
Mhm.
dominance. And we could throw hot lines about who Jesus was and how he was. I get all of that. But how do we answer the challenge of othering in our
Yeah.
world with a story about othering? I just don't know how we get there.
Mhm, mhm. Man, I was in a conversation this morning over coffee with a couple of friends about this very notion, this idea that the Christian story that many of us have been socialized into is one that is actually a story of power over, of conquering, of domination, and which I actually think is pretty antithetical to the cross-wearing God I think that we might see in Jesus. But what's fascinating to me, and this is where the conversation went, is how the story of othering or the story of domination is perceived as righteous. So I'm with you in the how do we flip the script? How do we tell a better story? I think it's especially hard when the story that we've been socialized into, we're not just convinced of it being like intellectually superior, it's righteous.
Mhm.
Yeah. So therefore, I'm not sure that we're in this moment where we can spar intellectually with one another about a better story. I think we actually have to put on display a better story, trusting that it may be contagious. So here's
Mhm.
my deepest concern right now, Ben, is so many of us who have been socialized into an American form of Christianity have developed muscles for self-preservation,
Mhm.
right? We don't have any muscle as it relates to sacrifice, especially sacrificing for the sake of another's good.
Mhm.
And self-preservation is actually seen as righteous, right? Because we all knew that if we prayed a particular prayer, we'll build some power and some safety and some prestige and all the things, and then we'll go to be in heaven with people just like us when we die. Like, self-preservation's fine, right? And it's righteous. And what makes me really nervous right now as I watch people continue to surround themselves with people who think just like them and reinforce the perceived righteousness of their viewpoint, as things continue to heat up in our country, and as people who have been dehumanized and denigrated for a long time suffer even more,
Mhm.
when this group of folk who have been socialized into this religion, when they watch this happen, their inertia is already towards self-preservation. It's not towards sacrifice. And so, like, uh, how do we live the hopeful alternative? What
Mhm.
is an alternative story? And yeah, and how do we live it in a way that it's contagious, Ben?
That is a phenomenal question. I'm not sure what comes up for me, and I'm going to say something that might sound a little provocative. But as you were talking, I was like, I think for Christians, we need a gospel of a dead Jesus. And
Say more.
what I mean by that is the sacrifice that you were just talking about, to me, is the end of the story that was the original Q gospel that we know for those of us that like to do a lot of theology at Mark, that just had the women coming to the tomb, the stone was rolled away, and they ran away terrified.
Yeah.
Like in that story, there's the hope of a resurrection. Nobody's seen Jesus. There's been no proclamations. There's wonder, is he alive? But what is known is that he gave up his life. And as he was dying, he was extending mercy to someone else who was dying beside him and offering forgiveness to the one who was oppressing him.
Mm,
The dead Jesus gospel is the one who actually could help us, I think, in this moment that, like James Cone used to talk about in his, liberation theology, is the one who doesn't succeed. Like it's the one who
mm,
who actually fails. And I think that
mm.
is good news for this moment, for us to not be seeking resurrection, but actually to be seeking the death on the cross for the sake of forgiveness for the other one who is
Yeah.
suffering, and also forgiveness for the one who is oppressing. Like, just trip
Man.
if that was the message
Man.
that we were preaching, that it was actually about being reconciled to the suffering and the oppressor, and that you're dying in
Yeah.
that process. But in that process, you're able to offer words to John the Beloved standing next to your mother to help the story of sacrifice live on. Like that's a different story than the story about, you rising with all power. And within 40 days, you have all control, not just you got all control over power and earth. You're floating up to the sky. You've now gone from 12 disciples to 500. That to me somewhat lives into some of the story of our success and what we're longing for, what I hear you speaking to. And if we're really going to mend divides with the suffering and the people who are oppressing,
Mhm.
we are going to have to become different people that
Mm.
are seeing our lives as vehicles
True.
to help serve that. And I'm not calling for some kind of martyrdom like, bro, I want to enjoy my life. I want to enjoy Janelle, my wife. I want to enjoy my daughters. Like, I want to have a good
Yeah.
life, but I also don't want to miss the opportunities to put some stuff on the line for the relationships, the people, and the moments that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I like that. I'm not alone right now in the heart pound of what you just shared because, again, as people who adhere to Easter Sunday and
Mm.
resurrection, I don't know, man, that also plays to this our fixation, our addiction of the happy ending.
Yeah, man.
And I just love how what my question was, what is the alternative story? What's a better story? And you actually pointed to suffering
Mm.
and what happened in the midst of the suffering, the mercy, the forgiveness, the offering of belonging. I mean, I don't know that I've ever considered, like, yeah, the cross, the power of the cross, unbelievable. God's declaration of unthinkable love. And a story played out there
Mhm.
that is a model for us in this time that in the midst of suffering for the sake of others, what does it mean to offer forgiveness, mercy, and belonging? Ben, that's
Well, and you and I, have had this conversation about grief, and you were talking about your dad. And, I'm living in a moment right now where my sister, who loved God, passed away the day after Christmas. And I'm still trying to resolve within myself that grief and the aspirations that she would be well, and the notions of all the people who I love deeply, who love God deeply, who all had words from God that she was going to be healed and she wasn't. Then kind of how we have to then move the goalposts and say, well, now she's healed in heaven. Just the
yeah,
inability for us to embrace an unhappy ending and get a new story that might still hold sadness and pain and mystery. But like the hope to me of my sister's passing is while she was fighting cancer and dying, I was able to offer my home to house her. I was able to serve her and make her organic meals and love on her. We had conversations in the 3 months of her journey to fight cancer that we had not had in 40 years. The opportunity to pick her up off the floor when she was throwing up, trying to deal with chemo, like there was a lot of sacredness and sacrifice, the work that I said no to so that I could say yes in the moment to be present
mhm,
with my sister. I think there are ways that we could find redemptive life and even resurrecting moments without trying to find our way to the happy ending. Because I think in the
mm,
real world that we have right now, authoritarianism is on the rise. America as a nation is on the decline. And I am not actively trying to figure out, well, how do we make sure America can stay on top? No, I think it's on the decline, and most empires don't last beyond 300 years. So why are we surprised? The version of America that we were
right.
born into is dying. The way that we learned how to relate to each other within that imperial system is struggling because we've operated within this kind of, shining city on a hill. And that version of it is dying. But maybe there's an opportunity, and maybe it starts with not a new story that we necessarily tell, but one we actually live out with each
Yeah,
other, that we start figuring out how to sit in those hard places, how to suffer with
mm,
each other. That suffering for some of us that identify more as progressive or liberal might be, how do I learn how to not get the things that I wish I was getting politically and yet not demonize the people that are active in doing it? This is hard stuff, right?
mm,
But I found that in my life, bro, and I had because I had to humanize loved ones who were shooting other loved ones that looked like me in the community. They weren't just changing policies. They weren't using tough rhetoric. They were killing people. Let's just say what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to learn how to sit with them and think about what it meant to offer them mercy. Also trying to think about how to sit at the table with the police officer and
Yeah.
offer forgiveness for a criminal justice system that has failed, while also sitting with the mother who was losing her son. Now, I just
Mhm.
described again the cross with the thief or
Yeah.
insurrectionist, whatever story you buy into, and the centurion at the bottom with Mary and John in a modern day story in
Yep.
Oakland,
That's it.
California.
That's
And
it. Forgiveness,
that's
mercy, and
come on,
belonging.
man. Come
Yep.
on. And that meant that I had to learn how not to have a transactional relationship with some police officers, but actually how to have a transformative one, where I was
Mm-hmm.
really invested in their lives, curious about their flourishing, also having deep pain and
Yep.
sometimes anger about the job that they were
Yep.
doing every day.
Yep. Yep. So let's take this real life story. Like, this is some of the front lines of mending divides in your life. Not all of us are going to be at the intersection of high volume shooters, mothers who have lost their sons, and police officers. But like this mercy, forgiveness, belonging, like we have to grow in our capacity for this right now. So let's dive into that for a moment.
Hmm.
Let's maybe do this in 3 different ways. Let's talk about the police first. What did it mean for you? What did it require of you? What did it
Hmm.
look like to be in a transforming relationship with, in this case, say the representative of the power broker? This person had the authority. They had the state backing them, right? So for us who are listening in, this is the person who holds authority. What does it mean to be in a transforming relationship with that person rather than a transactional one, Ben? And then I want to play it out with the high volume shooter. Then I want to play it out with the mother because it looks different.
Hmm. Yeah. I would say for the person with most authority, in my language, I call it the powerful. You're talking about the
Yep.
person with authority, right? I would say it looked like humanizing the person and
Mhm.
separating them from their authority within my mind and heart. So I mean, I
Mm.
had to have a bigger story. So I could be, as John Powell says, hard on the system, but soft on the person. So if I were to boil that all the way down inside a family structure, right? There's like the system of how a family might get down in terms of all of its familial roles. I might deeply disagree with how our family is functioning, but how do I at the same time humanize
Yeah.
the person in that family system, recognizing they didn't create it on their own. It's been created by environment, things that have been passed down over generations. And maybe you're contending for a new way that this family functions where you or other people are not being othered, but it's being able to actually understand the family system and even the thoughts that could come from the person as separate from the person.
Mm. Mm.
And
So,
you've got to become in
bro,
or
that's
that.
so that's my follow up right now. Like, your ability to do that is like hours of tilling,
Yeah,
hours
man,
of deep
for
work
sure.
before you're sitting.
Spiritual work.
Yes. So, what did that work look like in order to be able to humanize the powerful?
Well, I think at that time, and I'm saying at that time because now it will probably be a little different for me.
Mm.
At that time, it was my Christian ethic that I reached into. It was the tenets of my Christian faith that helped inform for me like this notion that everybody is redeemable. And because
Mhm.
I
Mm.
believed that, I had to tap into this notion to see the person as so many of the stories that inspired me and still do inspire me of Jesus seeing beyond the person's authority,
Yeah. Come
whether
on.
it's the centurion at the cross or whether it's the soldier that he runs into and recognizes his faith while he's complicit within a system of oppression, whether it's the tax collector who's robbing and fleecing the people. I saw it in him. And so I felt inspired around that. And because I aspired to be like Jesus, I was inspired to try to find a way to show up in those ways.
Mm.
Now, because I feel like I'm a little bit more of a mystic now that still loves Jesus a lot, but I
Yeah.
don't know so much whether the church is the place for me. But now it's being more inspired and rooted in the aspiration of who I want to be in the world and
Mm.
how I want to finish my story as a human and the legacy that I want to leave. And so
Mm.
that informs for me to try to slow down and separate people. And I think still in that gumbo pot inside me is my Christianity.
Yeah.
It's my dad and my mother's values. It's all the stuff that I've learned. But yeah, I mean, I think that's what it was for me then. And that's why, like, I was in Michigan with some folks yesterday. And, I was telling them, if it's your Christianness, dig deep for that. If it's your Buddhistness, your Muslimness, your Jewishness, your agnosticness, your human ness, your ancestorness, whatever that power source is, that divinity source, pull from that place,
Mm,
use those resources and find a way to separate
mm, mm,
people from the system.
mhm.
Because the reality is, if we really want to keep it all the way above, we're all complicit in some kind
Yeah.
of a
Yeah.
system,
Yeah.
depending on who's viewing the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. Let's linger with the powerful just a little bit more and then let's move on. I would imagine as I approach those with power, chances are good there's a conversation I want to have with them about the way that their use of power is causing harm.
Hmm.
Talk to us about how humanizing them, being pro-human in that moment with them is one piece of it. But then how do you also tell the truth with a kind of kindness that invites shift?
So, one, I'm a firm believer and have been for years that you have to earn the right to speak into people's lives. So, it's one thing to critique the system that someone is a part of. It's another thing if you're actually trying to speak to the person about their participation within the system.
Got
So,
it.
I think as it relates to unjust systems that are harming people, it's not about humanizing folks or being in relationship to speak about the injustice within a system. You can do that. We should do that. But if you're going to try to engage with the person, then you have to humanize, build relationship to the point where you can, instead of calling them out, call them in to
Mhm.
a new kind of relationship with the system. But in order to do that, you have to actually bridge with that
Yeah.
person, which
Yeah.
means you're not just trying to convert them to your point of view. Like in bridging, you have to really be honest about, are you really interested in entering into a journey with the story of somebody else with some margin that you don't know everything about the story that you deeply care about?
Woo! Come on,
Right.
Ben.
And it's
Yeah.
fair to say, no, that's not my jam. I think that's cool. And like, I'm gonna boil it down right now to a super hot issue. It's totally fair for someone to say, when I look about the violence that is happening in Gaza, I am not interested in being in a conversation with someone who is complicit within a system of causing that violence to happen. I'm actually not curious about understanding why and et cetera, et cetera. We should just be honest about that and not pretend that we're trying to be in a transformative relationship when we're not. You might say, I'm just not interested in that. There
Mhm.
might be others that might say, well, I am interested. I do want to figure out how to hear what is happening for that person in relationship to that military or that government or whatever. These are personal choices we get to make. I don't think we should shame ourselves or anybody else about our willingness or the emotional availability to engage in that. Everything is not for everyone, but I think we should be clear that if we're seeking to bridge, particularly with the human inside that authoritative system,
Mm.
then we've got to ask
Yeah.
ourselves, am I really willing to see this person?
Yes.
And if I'm not, don't waste your time or theirs. It's just
Yeah.
going to create more harm.
Come on, bro. Like yeah, this notion that I can enter into this and convince you of the superiority of my idea and that you'll convert to that's just a power game. That's the broken story,
Absolutely.
and that's us living with the kind of self-righteousness that says my viewpoint is better than your viewpoint. And now I'm going to convince you of it. The other thing that I carry in, and this is just low-hanging fruit, friends, for those of us who are listening in, is I'm moving toward those with power. What's helpful for me is the mindset that I'm never fully right and always partially wrong.
Mhm.
My perspective is not 2020. And so there's a gift to be offered and received in this transaction. And what that does, it just keeps me generous.
Mm.
It keeps me curious. It keeps me present in this, which
Yeah.
then in
Mm.
your words, Ben, it gives the relationship a chance to be transformational rather than transactional.
Mhm.
If I'm able to be present and curious, chances are there's a next conversation that will be had. Chances
For
are the
sure.
currency
Yeah.
of trust will grow enough for them to say, there's something about this guy. I don't know yet, but let's have another chat.
Yeah. And I think what the goal that we should be after, is there a way, and this might feel controversial or provocative, is there a way for me to work my way towards love with the person that I'm actually bridging with. Like I am starting to use the word love a lot more because I think if we can find a way to harness the materials that are in the ground to get
Mm,
a rocket into the stratosphere, then we gotta use our same minds and hearts to figure out how to harness some spiritual technology to harness the renewable energy of love.
mm,
Because any of us that are involved in families or different dynamics, love will make you do some counterintuitive things.
yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I think instead of trying to find our way towards how can I get this person to
Yeah,
begin to do the things I want them to do that serve the goals that I had before I engaged this person? It's how do I bridge with this person because of their authority? I really am curious about learning more about their story to see how we can work
yeah.
together to
Yes.
decrease some of the harm and the violence that I'm seeing that's happening. And I also want to grow in my love for them as a
Yeah,
human being.
yeah. So again, a mindset piece is I am the project to be undone and remade in this relationship.
Yes,
You
sir.
know, like, ah, let's talk about the high volume shooter. What does bridging toward that person, what did that look like? And how was it different than with the powerful?
Yeah, I mean, I think bridging with someone who's actually suffering usually is a recognition that you might have a little bit more privilege than they do
Hmm.
because of your awareness of their suffering juxtaposed to your experience. And what I've learned in that scenario has been to like mend that divide. It's about just learning to understand, to listen, to be available, and to offer what you can
Mm,
without over promising so that you don't under deliver. Right. And so it's the notion that what I can do is I can hear you. I can make time to hear you. I can make time to try to understand where it is that you're coming from. And I can do the best that I can with the limited resources I have to try to offer you something that can aid you in your suffering. I mean, when I think
mm,
about Jesus in relationship to this guy, he had no power to get him off the cross it
mm.
depending on how you see the story. He's
Yeah.
like, I'm kind of in a similar situation that you are. I'm also deeply troubled by this. I'm hanging on the cross as well. But I also recognize you're saying to
Yeah.
me, if I can be with you in paradise, you're wanting something, and I'm trying to see how I can help from this place that
Mm.
we're both at. We both are operating from some limited resources and
Wow.
opportunities, but I do want to figure out how I can give you what I can in the middle of both experiencing
Yeah.
obviously a not opportune scenario. So I just think, it's us being available. I think we got to get ourselves out of I checked myself. You remember when I was trying to be Batman? I think we got to get ourselves out of the superhero jam. The world's too big. There are too
Mhm.
many problems around it. And I think what we can do is, see those who are suffering around us, listen and be available,
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
do our best.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm finding that the suffering, so you would distinguish like from the powerful and the suffering. My experience is telling me right now that a request or a desire by the suffering is presence, is companionship, is like authentic
Mm,
relationship. And yes, absolutely, I don't want to suffer anymore. But I
mm,
think that in my relationships, I'm finding that the solutions, I don't even know if that's the right word, Ben, but the solutions to what oppresses them have been germinating in their souls for a long time.
mm, mm.
And so the nearness, and pace, and I'd like you to speak to pace there for just a second, because I too want to break agreement with the hero saviorism. I'm going to swoop in and I've got some resources. I could redeploy some stuff. I could connect you out. We could get some help, whatever it is. But there's like a pace to this that is a lot slower than I want it to be. If I'm actually going to be in solidarity rather than saviorism, or saviorhood. Can you speak to that a little bit in how you hold in tension the urgency for change with the pace of transformation?
Yeah, I think so. I think how I have tried and, maybe right now am trying is to hold a bigger story that doesn't cause the suffering that I'm seeing to be so overwhelming,
Mhm.
right? When I was in Johannesburg a couple months ago, I stood at a crater that a meteorite hit the earth over 200,000 years ago. And the people were asking us, what would it look like if we told the story of ourselves from this crater
Hmm.
rather than starting it wherever it is that somebody starts it to understand the piece. And if it starts at that 200,000 year with the crater, and there's another 200,000 years coming after us, then maybe our pace needs to be at the speed of, yeah, this suffering sucks. It's real. It does demand response. And yet there's a lot of suffering that unfortunately is going to keep happening. And I need
Mhm.
to figure out where I can make a contribution and realize that in all the contributions that I make, I am not going to end
Mm,
the violence of human beings on our journey to figure out how to do this without violence
mm,
being at the center. Like, we're still
mm.
learning that. We need to contribute to that. I'm not encouraging people to sit out, but I am also trying to encourage us to, drink some water and recognize that even the crises of our current moment are not even the only crises happening right now at the
Right.
current
That's
moment. It's
right.
just the one that we're focused on, the one that we see, however that shows up in our lives. So
Yeah.
we got to take some deep breaths and try to figure out how to show up and keep in mind that I think the greatest thing that we need to be trying to win is that war within ourselves, and
Mm.
to try to think about how we can be the most honest, responsible, accountable to the people that are around us. I'm still a big believer in this notion of charity, love beginning at home and spreading abroad. So let me be careful not to step over the unhoused person that I can offer a candy bar to or a cereal bar to. Let me not step over that person to get to my office so that I can rail on social media about something that's happening thousands of miles away from me.
Yeah.
Let me figure out how to root myself in my humanity and realize that
Hmm.
if I can master this across the hall at my house, in my
Mhm.
office, if I can master it in the neighborhood where I go get coffee, maybe those are some of the biggest areas that I might actually do well with myself and do world with the world that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the Ben and Jer of 15 years
Mm.
ago sitting in a cafe in Walnut Creek, California, you know, stumbling over our capes as we had croissants, and and and
That's
I'm
funny.
and I'm like, here we are now. Maybe this is second journey kind of stuff that's going on for us,
Mm,
but like maybe believing a little bit more in what our indigenous kin say about let's make decisions today for 7 generations from now. And how does that actually, how might that be more helpful than let's solve the moment?
mm,
That's part of what I'm hearing in that. And I feel, gosh, I want to live my life in such a way that I'm stumbling into people's pain with them more than I'm stumbling over my own cape because I think that I'm God's gift to whatever.
mm.
Speak really briefly, if you would, to the mother in pain. And you've hit forgiveness, you've hit mercy. Now let's talk belonging. And what has that looked like for you? In to kind of round this out.
Yeah, I would say concisely for me, it's looked like recognizing that I needed to build a big enough table that was large enough for everyone's suffering. And that was rooted, really with the mother who was losing her child to violence. To me, right now, it's the person that's the most vulnerable around us, the person whose voice is not heard.
Yeah.
How do we build a bigger table? And I think, like, when we think about this notion of bending divides, we need to be building tables that actually can invite people that normally would not be in relationship or proximity to each
Yeah.
other to be in proximity to each other. And some of the work that I think some of us can do is to think about that instead of just how to build a bridge, how can we be the bridge? So for some of the mothers, I tried to be the bridge. And sometimes that meant listening to their lament about the young men and their adulation about the police and how they wanted the police to go catch the person that took the life of their child. Sometimes it was hearing their critique about why I was humanizing the person who had done some violence rather
Yeah.
than assisting the police and them being thrown underneath the jail. It was just learning how to hold space and recognize that I'm never going to know enough to be of service to everyone the way that I would hope to. But what I can do is I can find a way to build spaces. I can become multilingual in my
Mm.
ability to talk authority, talk mercy,
Mhm.
talk belonging. so that I can be in multiple spaces and learning how to carry the
Yeah.
stories of what people need into those spaces while humanizing everybody
Yeah.
in those stories and being a bridge when it's time for the person on the cross to get to the other person on the cross, or the person on the cross to get to the person standing at the bottom with
Yeah.
the nails, or standing to the person who's weeping over the person who's dying. If I can become someone who can be used as a bridge to help give hope to people and bring people together, that's what I found in my life. That's what I'm trying to do
Mhm.
right now in different ways. And yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask 2 final questions for now, Ben. There's a whole list of other ones for another episode, but I'm just grateful for the living illustration that you just were able to give us of bridging in 3 different ways. I would imagine that you are misunderstood or distrusted by the others while you're bridging to one of them. For
Mhm.
example, that you're bridging to the powerful causes you to maybe be trusted less by the high volume shooter, or the mother who's like, "What are you doing talking to them?" When or when you talk to them, you know what I want you to say, and if you don't say it, you're not doing it enough. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
in this work, it's not peaches and cream. It's not everybody's not grateful that you're humanizing all of them. How do you navigate that?
You know, there were times where I was trying to engage everyone at the same time. In this period of my life, I've actually made some choices for my own self care and well being to not engage everyone at the same time, but
Got it.
actually to focus my attention on one group. And I think that's fine. I think we should really say to ourselves, like, what can I do and really take care of myself? And so, I've made a decision to try to actually be engaging right now in this season of my life with more of the people that have the authority and have the powerful, and to do more bridging with them, and to try to figure out how I can invite them into their becoming, and to think about how we can be critical on the system, but really think about that deep relationship building that happens with them that could humanize them, helps me know a little bit more about what it means to be them, so that
Mhm.
hopefully I can be a good sibling on the road with them. So I think one of the important things is everybody to just ask themselves, what time is it for me?
Mm.
And listen deeply to your heart for that answer. We shouldn't rush it. It might take you a month, 2 months to get that answer back, but what time is it for you? And the moment of the emergency doesn't need to be what dictates our answer. We should listen well to ourselves, to the God of our understanding, as we all have that, and to make the most faithful response we can with the answer we get.
Man, that sounds like the last word for this conversation, Ben. Thank you. Thanks for the work that you're doing, man. It's really it's amazing to be able to talk with friends like you who are navigating the front lines of all sorts of different conflicts, and then to be able to have a conversation like this where you get to pull the threads and help us as we're navigating the front lines of our own conflicts. So I'm grateful for you, brother, and be well, my friend. I look forward to the next time we're on.
Sounds great, man. Love you. Take care.
The Mending Divides podcast is a production of Global Immersion. Learn more about our work companioning Western Christians on a journey from a religion that dominates to a faith that restores at globalimmerse.org.